I still have to be really aware of what I'm using the camera for and make sure I'm using it for an appropriate task, because this thing isn't the jack of all trades like the D850.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. It really makes me wonder. Ooh, I wonder.
Hey again! I'm back in my mega comfortable yellow chair. I love this thing. So I'm going to sit in it. I wanted to do a follow-up. It's been a while since I've talked about the Nikon Z system. So currently I have the Z7. I have used the Z6 extensively as well. I got this when it first came out, which was about, I forget, 16 months ago, something like that. And I've been using it ever since. And I like it. I don't love it, but a lot of people have asked about my thoughts since version 2 of the firmware came out that had some autofocus improvements and a few other little things in there. And I just haven't had the time to sit down and spend a few minutes here. So I'm going to do my best to keep this very short. I'm already being long-winded, but I'm going to try and knock that off. So here's my thoughts. Bottom line is I really enjoy using this camera. I really enjoy the system. So I continue to use it all the time. But there are some things that it doesn't do as well as other cameras that I own. It has some drawbacks, right? So bottom line is I enjoy using the camera. I like it a lot, but it's not perfect for me as a nature photographer. I do landscape and wildlife, but I also do a lot of photographing my kids. So I do a lot of just kind of action, like, trying to keep up with the kids. And this thing should be better at that than it is, unfortunately. And I don't use it for that just because of that. I have a camera that's better, and you probably can't see it. It's sitting over here. That's the little Fuji X-T30 with a 35mm f1.4 lens, and that's my favorite thing to photograph my kids with. It's fast, it's small, it's light, it's got a big aperture, and it's got great eye autofocus. Does everything, ticks all those boxes. And this is kind of not as good as that. So let's talk about, first of all, the things that I love about the Z system is the electronic viewfinder is such a big bonus, where you're looking through the viewfinder and you can see exactly what the photograph's going to look like before you press the shutter. So you should never miss an exposure again. You can always get your color, your white balance, your exposure all dialed in, working great. I can put the histogram in the viewfinder so I can see exactly what that histogram's doing as I'm adjusting my exposure. That's fantastic. And then on the odd occasion when I need to override focus, which unfortunately happens more often with this camera than it does my D850s, you need to take control of the autofocus and go into full manual focus mode, and it has focus peaking, so you can really nail manual focus a lot more effectively with this camera than you can DSLR like the D850. I really enjoy the ergonomics of it. It feels great. It feels like a Nikon. It feels like quality in your hand. I dig that about it a lot. I love shooting video with this camera. That's kind of the one thing that if my D850 shot video like this, I wouldn't own this. But this has a major advantage for shooting video. It has actual usable autofocus in video, and the D850 is a real turd for that. I think all Nikon DSLRs are turds for that, until we get maybe the new D6, which is coming soon-ish. And I also love to shoot video through the viewfinder as well. I can get a stable, when I'm not on a tripod. So I'm out in the woods a lot, and I'm hand-holding not only for photographs, but I'm also hand-holding for video. And so for me to be able to shoot here, this is a lot more stable position where I can kind of smush it against my eye a little bit versus trying to hold it out here and keep everything stable. So that's a big deal to be able to shoot video in a much better way than I can with my DSLRs. I love the focus point coverage, so that pretty much the entire screen has focus points, and I can move that focus point around anywhere, you know, in the entire frame. I do like that a lot. And let's see, what else? The lenses. The lenses were kind of the big surprise here, where this is the 24-70 f4. It's small and light, and it's excellent optically. I've tested it right up against my newest version of the F-mount 24-70 f2.8 with the VR, and this, I think, gives better image quality in every scenario I've tried it with. And this is small and inexpensive and light. I have used the 24-70 f2.8 Z lens. I don't own it, but it's fantastic. It's even better. But I just haven't bought that lens yet. I will eventually. I do like that I can use the FTZ adapter and use all my F-mount lenses. Of course, I wouldn't own this if I couldn't do that. So that's important as well. So that's it. I mean, bottom line is it's a great camera. I enjoy using it, but it does have some flaws here. So should we talk about those too? Some things that I don't like? All right, let's do it. So let's get this one out of the way right out of the gate. This is actually not something that bothers me, but it seems to bother all of the internet, that there's a single card slot here. I currently have a compact flash, a CF Express card in there. It works great. One card is all I need. I'm not out there shooting weddings where it's going to ruin a bunch of people's days if I have a card failure. So for me, it's not important. Other people, it is. Only you can decide for yourself if that's important to you. Some things that I don't like. There is a slight lag in the electronic viewfinder. It's a beautiful electronic viewfinder. The quality is great. But you do notice when you're shooting something really fast that's happening, there is a slight delay in there versus an optical viewfinder. I think that's going to improve and get better over time. We will see. Another thing I don't like is the buttons aren't as customizable as on the D850 or the D500 or the D5, Nikon's DSLRs. For instance, I like to program this button here to be another AF on button with a different autofocus mode. And for some reason, you can't do that. I don't know what Nikon is thinking there. But at any rate, it's less customizable than my other cameras. So I can't get them to function exactly the same, where all the buttons, I know exactly what they're going to do. I have to treat this one a little bit differently than my DSLRs. This eye cup keeps falling off. I have it gaffer taped right there. So that thing pops off all the time when you're putting it in and out of your bag. It just doinks and it flies off. So hopefully Nikon can address that. It's no big deal. Little gaffer tape. It's good to go. There is no vertical grip that has controls. They made some ridiculous battery grip. Shame on you, Nikon. That's ridiculous. Just an extra that holds two batteries there, but there's no controls. It's just this big, bulky battery thing that's really expensive. So thumbs down on that. I do like to shoot vertical quite a bit, and I like to have a grip with controls right on there. And you can't do that on the Z6 or the Z7, which is a bummer. Hey, Lula. How's it going? She's a sweet beagle. So this is kind of an obscure complaint, but for me, it's an important one. I tried to have one of these converted to infrared, and it didn't work out very well. So apparently there's something going on with the sensor and the phase detect pixels that are on the sensor, that when you convert this to infrared, in a lot of situations, all those phase detect pixels will show up as banding in the infrared image. So I converted it. I used it for a while. I tried to work with LifePixel, who did the conversion for me, and they couldn't fix it, of course. They could reproduce the problem, and they couldn't fix it. So I sent it back, and they converted it back to a regular camera again. And it's the same problem with the Z6 and the Z7. So I was hoping to just be able to carry, infrared converted Z6 and use all of my Nikon lenses, but that didn't work out. So that's a bit of a bummer for me. One of the big problems that still is a problem, and it won't be fixed until Nikon comes out with a more professional, action-oriented version of the camera, is the small buffer. This thing buffers out all the time compared to my other cameras. It's just not made for action. So I have to be real careful what I'm using this for landscapes and wildlife that isn't moving particularly fast. It works great. Speaking of which, the baddest complaint that everybody has about these is the autofocus system, and it's just not there. It's fine, it's adequate, but as somebody who's buying a top-of-the-line brand new camera that's quite expensive, I expect better than adequate. And the competitors all have better than adequate offerings, and so Nikon is behind on this, and that's a bummer. So Sony is leading the pack there. Their autofocus is not only adequate, it's as good or better than anything that Nikon has, including their DSLRs. So it is absolutely possible in a mirrorless camera to have autofocus that truly is excellent. And this is not it. This is truly mediocre autofocus for continuous autofocus. If you're shooting an AFC or AFS, single servo all the time, it's fantastic. It's quick and it's as accurate. It's fantastically accurate. It's more accurate than my DSLRs. But, you know, that's a small percentage of the time what I'm doing here. So as wildlife photographers, I'm using continuous focus all the time and using back button. And it's just mediocre. On its best day, it's mediocre. So even with firmware 2, they did not improve it to the point where I would consider it even good. It's just mediocre, and that's too bad because this thing's been out for 16 months, and I was just really hoping Nikon would turn over kind of a new leaf and give us firmware updates. But they just haven't, you know, like Fuji. You know, that Fuji is light years ahead of, this Nikon in autofocus tracking and eye autofocus performance that I use it for when shooting my kids. So that's the biggest negative of the whole system right now is the continuous autofocus performance, and it's just not good. And Nikon needs to do something about it. I can certainly make good images with it, and I have, but it's just not consistent. You can't get it to be as consistent as a D850 or D5 or a D500 or any of the Sonys or the newer Fujis. It's just not there. So there's my long-winded, I went on way too long there. There's my long-winded but attempt at being short just to address people's questions about what are my thoughts about the camera now since I've had a chance to work with the firmware version 2 updates. I still love using the camera, but I still have to be really aware of what I'm using the camera for and make sure I'm using it for an appropriate task, because this thing isn't the jack of all trades like the D850. It's not made for sports action wildlife. It can do it sort of, but it's inconsistent and it's not the best tool for that job. So I'm still reaching for my D850s when that kind of stuff. Similarly, I'm reaching for my Fuji X-T30 when it comes time to photograph my kids, and I want eye tracking autofocus that's going to be consistent and good. Okay? So I hope that answers your questions, and I would encourage you to try the camera out and for yourself and see, because I'm one guy, but the whole internet is a buzz with poor Nikon's autofocus tracking capabilities. They're just not there yet. Sony is where it's at if that's what you want. So thanks for watching. See you on the next video. Bye-bye.